Hello and welcome back to episode 72. You are Trapped in History with me, your host, Robbie Malcomson. This is Cold War in the Contemporary World Part 2. We are wrapping up our series of narrative summaries for each unit in AP European history. Going forward, I will do more specific topic episodes, vlogs, interviews again, conversations, and even topics venturing outside of European history, even into pop culture and other kind of topics. So let's move into the rest of Unit 9 tonight, as I call beyond just the Cold War, into some more other major themes. Again, this isn't every single intrinsic or illustrative example that could be taught in this unit, but it is some of your main thematic topics like decolonization, second wave feminism, environmental and political change, globalization, those kind of topics. We can always come back later and do more focused topics on specific, more nuanced ones. One of the topics that I will not include in this episode that looking back, I wish I would have planned for, which was in Ireland with the Troubles from 1968 to 98. And that's something that I hope to focus on later. I'm going to do an Irish War of Independence. I'll do going into the 1968 to 1998 Troubles. I'll come back to that one a little bit later on. So let's go into one of our main first topic focuses, and that is the term decolonization. It's another great tie-in to the topic of nationalism, which we have been talking about all the way back since episode 67. So while in Europe is divided during the Cold War, something else is happening around the globe. European empires are collapsing. Nations in Asia, such as India and Vietnam, Africa, like Ghana, Algeria, South Africa, topics like that, they're going to demand independence. This is decolonization, the unraveling of just imperial control, especially after the World War II into the Cold War era. For Europe, what does this mean? I guess it could mean a loss of global dominance, economic and political adjustment needed, a redefinition of identity, an increase of migrant workers and immigration into Europe. Lots of different changes that go beyond even what we cover in AP European history. But it does bring us to our first philosophical question of the night that we could wrestle with our students and other teachers and other history enthusiasts. And that is, how does a continent once ruled the world, or who once ruled the world, redefine itself without an empire? So decolonization, it forces Europe to confront a loss of power, identity, and purpose. For centuries, imperial expansion had been a source of wealth and prestige, reinforcing the belief in European dominance. But as colonies gained independence, that narrative collapsed. European nations had to shift from being global rulers to regional partners, redefining their place in the world. This transition raises a deeper philosophical question: how do societies adapt when long-held identities are no longer valid? And perhaps more importantly, can a nation fully reckon with the consequences of the past, or does history continue to shape itself in present ways that are difficult to escape? You know, one of the ways in which, or one of the early textbooks I received when I was first trained in APSI trainings, I received one of the EMSCO versions of European history for placement. And in the 2019 version, again, it doesn't say the necessarily version on. It's not the newest one that came out a year or two ago. But there is a paragraph that I thought was really interesting over the effects of decolonization. I wanted to read a small excerpt from that for two small paragraphs. The book reads, or has in it, even after decolonization, European influence remains strong in many former colonies. As these countries dealt with poverty and factional disputes, they remained dependent on the West and Japan for technology and financial aid. In addition, many former colonial subjects migrated to Europe seeking economic opportunities. Migration due to decolonization especially affected Great Britain, France, and the Netherlands. In the decades after World War II, Europe needed migrant labor to help rebuild. This is a great tie-in, as you know, into the destruction that took place in World War II. About 10 million people, according to AMSCO, migrated to Western Europe between 1950, 5 years after World War II, and 1973 alone. So just 23 years, 10 million migrants. However, when economic times grew tighter in the 1970s, many European countries found that workers they considered temporary residents wanted to become permanent citizens. Ethnic and racial tensions between immigrants and native populations grew over time as Europe found its ideas about its identity changing. And this builds into like a new Europe, another reason for maybe more of a regional sort of unification together. And this leads us to an economic union. So in response to the decades of conflict, Western Europe begins an ambitious project of cooperation. European ties start to deepen and political collaboration grows. Eventually, this leads to the creation of the European Union, and with it, a shared currency called the euro. This is something entirely new in European history, nations choosing to now share sovereignty rather than fight over it. But even here, tension still remains. The decision of the United Kingdom in the late 2010s to leave the EU, which was called Brexit, raises an important question. Going forward, can unity survive in a world where national identity still matters deeply, like in the UK? The creation of the European Union represents one of the most ambitious political experiments in history. Nations are choosing cooperation over conflict now. However, the tension between unity and sovereignty remains consistent, as seen in events like Brexit, but not since that particular point as we enter 2026 now. While economic integration and shared institutions promoted stability, national identity continues to hold emotional and cultural power. This raises a fundamental question again: can people feel loyalty to both a nation and a broader collective at the same time? Or will moments of crisis always push societies back towards radical nationalism and separation, as we've seen the rise of different separatist groups that could be covered in AP Euro in Unit 9 and beyond that into the 2000s, into the 2020s, separatist movements, hard-line conservative movements. There are definitely issues over the tension of immigration policies within Europe going into today. So while political systems shifted, so did society. Post-World War II Europe experiences economic growth, rising standards of living, and the expansion of what was called the welfare state for AP Euro. This provides healthcare, education, and social security similar to what we saw in the United States. But perhaps the most profound changes were actually cultural. Let's move over to our next big topic in Unit 9 as far as a thematic focus. Let's move into second wave feminism, not to be confused with first wave feminism from Mary Wollstonecraft forward, on topics like education and women's suffrage and to women's right to run for public office, etc. Second wave feminism, mainly around the 1950s and 60s era onward, is different, other than just chronology. In the mid-20th century, women start to push for greater equality in all areas of life, and this includes topics like birth control, abortion rights, equal pay, and workplace opportunities, and even more opportunities in athletics and education, etc. Now, second wave feminism, it challenges the traditional gender roles and reshaped European societies and continues to do so today, leading to another set or two philosophical questions that us in our classes can wrestle with. And we could ask ourselves, or the students, how did second wave feminism redefine the relationship between the private sphere of society, like family, sexuality, reproduction, and the public sphere, like work, politics, and law? We could ask ourselves to go deeper into that for complexity and nuance and seek what tensions did this create within European societies. We could take this particular stance on it. I believe that second wave feminism transformed European society by challenging deeply rooted assumptions about gender roles, work, and personal autonomy that had been established over centuries. There are gains in areas like birth control access, abortion rights, and workplace equality, which expanded opportunities for women, but it also sparked debates about tradition, morality, family, and the pace of just change in general. This question pushes us to wrestle and think beyond legal reforms and changes and consider the lived reality of equality. We could ask, is equality achieved through laws alone, or does it require cultural transformation as well, which, as we know, comes through time? And who determines really in society when or if a society has reached that goal, those in power or those still seeking that change? And I think that many of us would argue that's a dichotomy of both those things, but definitely mostly on those who are seeking that change. On another topic of societal change beyond just second wave feminism, we get into environmental and political changes, mainly with the Greens or the Green Party starting there in Germany. Now, new political movements do emerge in Europe during this time period, including, like I said, environmental activism. In Germany, the Alliance 90, the Greens rise to prominence, reflecting concerns about sustainability, nuclear power, especially after the Chernobyl incident in Ukraine, and the environment. And this signals a shift. Politics is no longer just about survival or power or ideology. It's also about the quality of life and the future of the planet that we live on. The rise of these movements that included the Greens reflects a shift in political priorities from immediate survival to now more long-term sustainability. This introduces a new kind of responsibility, one that extends beyond national borders and even beyond the present generation. Environmental challenges cannot be solved by one nation alone, yet solutions often require sacrifice and cooperation that are difficult to achieve politically, especially if there are sacrifices politically and economically that need to be made with very little data to be able to support that long-term change or stability or what effect will have on society. So there's some understandable conservative pushback on that. This raises a key tension, though, in the whole issue or situation. We could ask, how do societies balance economic growth, national interest, and global responsibility for the common well-being of everyone? And can political systems built on short-term decision-making effectively address long-term problems? I think that is one of the best questions to ask, not just AP European history students, but students in a college level or just adults in a conversation. I plan on addressing this question in a community seminar locally that I'll have an episode on here pretty soon. Maybe even episode 73 might be a focus on that, more in our local community and what I'm going to be doing with that topic. One of our last sections, I would say the last major section of the night to try to address, and that would be more about technology in Unit 9 in that era past World War II during the Cold War and globalization. And this, again, is one of the most transformative eras of all time. We've even seen AP European history questions that compare the effects of the internet to the printing press over time. So let's focus on technology and globalization to finally end the narrative pace and scope of all these 9 units in AP European history. So in terms of technology, let's focus on the rise of the internet, the spread of cell phones, and even more so social media's prominence, especially around the year 2010 and afterwards. Now, communication in society, it now becomes instant. Information becomes global. Europe and the entire world becomes more interconnected in ways that we had never imagined before. But with that connection comes new challenges of migration, cultural identity, cultural tension. And again, being able to spread information quickly is great, but it also allows being able to spread misinformation and propaganda even quicker than before. And I think it's even more incumbent upon us as citizens of the world to try to figure out ways to vet those particular things and try to find what the truth is. And this is why I think philosophy just plays such an incredibly important role, not just in our lives, but for our work of understanding history and teaching and learning history. So my last philosophy question of all 9 units is going to be, in a globalized world, what does it mean to belong? Again, a question that I hope to ask in my upcoming community seminar coming up pretty soon. And I'm going to end this with my short little rationale that I typed up here. And I believe that the rise of the internet and cell phones has truly transformed communication identity and the idea of what community is. And we brought this up in my recent, I guess back in October, it was our philosophy Socratic seminar in the community over the philosophy of community. People now, we are connected across borders in ways that were unimaginable in earlier periods of European and world history, creating new opportunities to collaborate with each other, but also new forms of conflict and misunderstanding. Migration and cultural exchange have reshaped European societies, leading to debates over national identity, integration, and belonging. This question forces us to consider, or even reconsider, traditional definitions of what a community is. Is identity rooted in geography, culture, language, or is this something more fluid now due to the increased level of communication through technology? And as globalization continues, will it bring people closer together or highlight the differences more that divide them? So to wrap this up, and to consider wrestling with the modern world, from 1945 to today, Europe has undergone an extraordinary transformation. From division to cooperation, from empire to integration, from war to uneasy peace. And however, the tensions still remain today between unity and what identity is, between globalization and nationalism, between progress and uncertainty. So I think we need philosophy now even more than ever in life, or just as much as we ever did in life. My closing thought for this, and as we leave Unit 9, I want you to think about this, whether you're a teacher or you're a student or just a history enthusiast, as I mentioned before. I want to leave you with, the world we live in right now, the technology that you use, the type of political debates that we see, the questions of identity and belonging are all part of this European and, more importantly, world narrative story. And the final question I think that we could wrestle with as history enthusiasts, all of us, in a world more connected than ever before, can humanity overcome division, or will we continue to recreate that division in just new forms? And this final philosophical question here, it reminds us as students and teachers that history is not a linear path toward unity or division, but it's a constant negotiation, collective bargaining between the two. The Cold War ended, sort of, but the new tensions emerged. Empires collapsed, but new power structures formed. Technology connected the world, but also it creates new divides in the world. This suggestive vision is not just something humanity simply overcomes. It is something we continually recreate, reshape, and respond to. The responsibility then is not to expect a perfect utopian resolution, but to remain aware of these patterns and to actively choose how we engage with them. History, my friends, does not determine the future, but it does reveal the possibilities and the consequences of the choices we make. As always, my friends, keep questioning the past in order to understand the present and be contagious.